They called her the most beautiful woman in the world, the face Hollywood could sell in a single close-up, the kind of glamour that made strangers forget how to breathe. But behind that perfect lighting, behind the satin gowns and studio smiles, she carried a secret no one wanted to believe. Not a scandal, not a hidden lover, a weapon, an idea so dangerous to the enemy and so unbelievable to her own allies that it sat ignored while men died in cold black water. While the world watched her on the silver screen, she spent her nights drawing circuits, studying radio theory, and building a solution that would one day echo inside Wi-Fi, GPS, and Bluetooth. Her name was Hedy Lamarr, and the thing she created is part of what connects you right now. In 1940, while most of Hollywood was learning how to look patriotic on posters and how to smile while selling war bonds, one actress was working on a problem that could change war itself. Her mansion in Los Angeles looked like every other movie star's dream, from the outside, bright, elegant, untouchable. But inside, the rooms told a different story. Glamorous film posters shared wall space with technical manuals. A vanity mirror reflected not just lipstick and powder, but drafting paper covered in tight handwriting and sharp diagrams. The studio expected her to prepare for her next role. Instead, Hedy sat late at night with a pencil in her hand and a storm in her mind, returning again and again to the same question. Why were Allied ships dying when the solution felt so close? The newspapers were full of it. Convoys torn apart, fires on the horizon, merchant crews vanishing into the Atlantic as if the sea itself had turned hostile. German U-boats were cutting shipping lanes like razors. Every week the numbers climbed, and the tone of the headlines darkened. The Allies could build ships, yes, but ships took time. Men did not return as easily as steel. Hedy read these reports with a kind of fury that didn't belong in a Hollywood mansion. She wasn't supposed to understand the mechanics of the war. She wasn't supposed to picture the ocean at night or the sudden violence of an unseen torpedo. But she did. The problem she obsessed over wasn't dramatic to anyone who wanted simple war stories. It sounded almost boring when reduced to words. Radio guidance could be jammed. The United States had poured money and hope into weapons that could be guided by radio signals, torpedoes, and bombs that, in theory, could be steered toward the enemy like a hand on a wheel. On paper, it was brilliant. Accuracy in darkness, accuracy in storms, accuracy when the target moved. In reality, the Germans had found the weakness. A radio signal lived on a frequency. If the enemy detected that frequency, they could drown it in noise. The signal would vanish inside a roar of interference, and the weapon would become blind. Sometimes that blindness meant failure. Sometimes it meant disaster. Hedy understood that danger with an intimacy that didn't come from acting. Before Hollywood, before the studio contracts, before the carefully manufactured image, she had lived another life in Europe, a life she rarely spoke about, because speaking about it felt like reopening a locked room. She had been married to Friedrich Mandl, an Austrian arms manufacturer with influence that reached into the shadows. He hosted dinners where powerful men talked loudly, drank heavily, and assumed the young wife at the table was decoration. They discussed weapon systems and contracts the way other men discussed horses or stocks. Nazi officials, military buyers, engineers, and industrialists, men who believed secrets stayed safe as long as women were present. Hedy sat there, silent, beautiful, and listening. While they laughed, she learned. She learned how jamming worked. She learned how guidance systems failed. She learned what a navy feared and what it pretended not to fear. She learned the language of power, frequencies, interference, signal to noise, control, disruption. Not because anyone taught her kindly, but because they underestimated her so completely that they spoke as if she were invisible. She escaped that marriage the way desperate people escape cages, not politely, not gradually, but suddenly. She drugged her maid, took the maid's clothes, and vanished into the night with the kind of calm that is really terror wearing a mask. She fled to London. She crossed borders like a fugitive. She remade herself. Eventually, she reached America, and Hollywood welcomed her as a fantasy it could sell. She became famous for her face. But her mind, the part of her that had been forced to listen at those dinner tables, never forgot what it had absorbed. Now, in California, as German submarines hunted the Atlantic, those memories clawed their way back. Hedy sat at her desk and drew again and again. Transmitter, receiver, frequency, jammer. She wrote the same word at the top of page after page, as if writing it could break it open. There has to be a way. One night, she whispered the thought that kept returning. The thought that felt like a door half open in a burning house. What if the signal didn't stay put? What if it moved? If the signal could change frequencies faster than the enemy can track it, she murmured, then they can't jam what they can't catch. It sounded simple, almost childish, like suggesting you could escape a pursuer by changing streets. But radio was not a street. Radio was physics. Radio was math. Radio was a battlefield you could not see. And the people who worked in that world treated it like a temple. Hedy was not supposed to walk into it. A knock interrupted her scribbling. Her butler announced a guest arriving for dinner. Hedy barely looked up, annoyed by the interruption until the name registered. George Antheil. George was her neighbor, a composer with a reputation for being both brilliant and impossible. Hollywood knew him for music, for film scores, for performances that made polite audiences uncomfortable. But Hedy knew something else about him. Beneath the public eccentricity, George had a private obsession with machines, mechanical timing, automation, systems that could perform complex tasks with precision. The two of them had bonded over tinkering in a way that seemed almost absurd in a town built on appearances. George stepped into the room, expecting small talk, a party, laughter. He found Hedy hunched over drawings like a scientist who hadn't slept. "George," she said, voice low and urgent, "forget dinner. I need you to see this." He raised an eyebrow. "You look like you're planning a bank robbery." "I'm planning something worse," she replied. "I think I found a way to make radio-guided torpedoes unjammable." Most men would have laughed. Most men would have patted her hand and told her to rest, to leave war to war people. But George had seen her mind at work before. He didn't dismiss her. He leaned in. "Unjammable?" he echoed. "The Germans only need to find the frequency and flood it with noise." "Not if the frequency doesn't stay the same," Hedy said, eyes brightening as she spoke, as if the idea itself was lighting her from within. "Not if it changes so fast that by the time they find it, it's already gone." George stared at the diagrams, trying to translate her thought into something he could feel in his bones. Like, Hedy searched for the right metaphor, something more human than equations. Like music, like a pattern. And then George's face changed, understanding landing like a heavy object. "Like a piano roll," he said. "Like a player piano." He didn't say it as a joke. He said it with the shock of seeing the answer hiding in something familiar. A player piano followed a predetermined sequence punched into a paper roll. The roll told the instrument what to do, when to do it, and how to stay perfectly timed. If a torpedo and a ship could share a song, could share the same pattern, then both could hop frequencies in sync, always together, always moving. To an enemy, the signal would look like scattered flashes. To the weapon, it would be a steady line. Hedy smiled, not because it was cute, but because it was real. "Exactly," she said. "But both sides would need the same pattern, the same timing, perfect synchronization." George sat down, excitement pushing aside skepticism. "We can do that," he said slowly. "If we can miniaturize the mechanism, if we can keep the timing stable." Neither of them said the words Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. Those words didn't exist yet. But what they had just described, synchronized frequency hopping, was the skeleton of a future world. The problem was, future worlds don't impress wartime bureaucracies, not at first. To understand why Hedy couldn't let it go, you have to understand the terror of the Atlantic at that moment. From the early years of the war into the darkest stretch of convoy losses, German submarines were winning a silent battle beneath the waves. The ocean didn't look like a battlefield from the shore. It looked endless, indifferent. But out there, in cold darkness, ships became targets the moment they left port. Picture an escort commander on a destroyer's bridge after midnight, wind cutting through every seam in his coat. Somewhere behind him, merchant ships move in a tense line, blacked out, carrying fuel, food, ammunition, everything that keeps armies alive. Somewhere beneath the water, an enemy submarine listens, calculates, and waits. A sonar report crackles up. A contact, a bearing, a possible U-boat slipping away after firing. The commander orders weapons prepared. He orders radio guidance activated. 2 torpedoes launch, and for a moment hope flashes because the theory says the weapon can be steered, corrected, guided like an extension of human intention. Then the radio operator's voice changes. It tightens. "Sir, we're being jammed. I'm losing the signal." The commander knows what that means. He's seen it before. The Germans have found the frequency and smothered it. The torpedoes drift. They spin. They become expensive metal fish wandering through darkness until their fuel dies. The submarine escapes. The convoy loses another ship the next night. The same failure repeats. Not because the Allies don't have courage, but because the enemy has found a way to silence their control. Engineers tried to solve it with brute force, more power, stronger transmitters. But more power wasn't always possible on a ship. They tried different guidance concepts, wires that could snap or tangle, ideas that didn't survive the ocean's cruelty. Each solution broke in the hands of reality. To the Navy's experts, jamming felt like an unbreakable law. If you talk on a single frequency, the enemy can scream on that same frequency. Conversation ends, game over. Hedy hated that sentence. Game over was what the Germans wanted. She didn't come to America to watch her homeland burn while she posed for cameras. She wanted to fight, and this was how she could fight, by making a signal that couldn't be pinned down. For weeks, then months, Hedy and George met in her home, late at night, when the city went quiet and the studios couldn't see what she was doing. Their sessions didn't feel like Hollywood. They felt like a secret laboratory. Hedy drew the concept with the clarity of someone who'd lived near weapons dealers, who'd heard officers talk about limitations and vulnerabilities. George translated the concept into mechanism and timing, thinking like a composer and an engineer at once. The key is synchronization, Hedy said one night, sketching two identical pattern keys side by side. If the ship and the torpedo ever lose sync, we lose control. How many frequencies? George asked. As many as possible, Hedy replied. If we use only a few, they might jam the right one by chance. George looked at his own world music, patterns, repetitions, and smiled. 88, he said, half joking, half serious. Like a piano, one for each key. It was absurd and elegant at the same time. A musical number repurposed for war. 88 frequencies hopping in a pattern known only to the transmitter and receiver. To an enemy trying to jam it, the signal would be a ghost here, gone, elsewhere, gone again. By the time they found it, it would already be gone. Hedy worked between film shoots, hiding textbooks like contraband, studying radio theory the way other actresses studied lines. She was self-taught, which meant she learned with a particular intensity because there was no classroom to protect her pride. George refined the mechanical concept, thinking about how player piano technology could be shrunk, how timing could be kept stable. They built prototypes in their minds first, then in small parts, testing the logic, adjusting assumptions, reworking the pattern. Sometimes, exhaustion made Hedy bitter. "They think I'm a face," she said once, voice tight. "The studio head told me I should stick to being beautiful and leave thinking to men." George didn't try to comfort her with empty praise. He gave her something sharper, purpose. "Let them underestimate you," he said. "If this works, it saves lives. That matters more than what they think." By the time the design felt complete, they faced the most difficult part, getting anyone in the military to take them seriously. On December 1st, 1941, Hedy Lamarr and George Antheil filed a patent in the United States for what they described as a secret communication system. The patent number, too long, too bureaucratic for something so urgent, was 2,292,387. On paper, it was dry, technical language, diagrams, mechanisms. In reality, it was a blueprint for defeating jamming, for creating a communication link that could survive an enemy's attempt to crush it. 6 days later, the world changed. Pearl Harbor. America entered the war fully, and suddenly everything Hedy had been thinking about felt less like an intellectual exercise and more like a race against death. She approached the proper channels, the government councils meant to evaluate inventions for military use. She imagined, for a moment, that the crisis would force open minds, that necessity would overpower prejudice, that someone would read the patent, see the logic, and say, "Yes, now, we need this." Instead, the response came back with the chill of dismissal. They said the mechanism seemed impractical, too heavy, too complicated. They suggested she could serve better by using her celebrity to sell war bonds. In other words, smile for the cameras and let the real work be done by real men. Hedy stared at that message as if it were a personal insult carved into paper. She had escaped men who dealt weapons for profit. She had crossed oceans and remade herself. And now, when she tried to give the Allies something that could save lives, she was told to do what actresses do: perform. George faced the same wall. Navy officials listened just long enough to be polite, then forgot him the moment they left the room. A composer talking about torpedoes sounded like a joke to them. They heard Hollywood, and their brains closed. They heard actress, and their eyes slid away from the diagrams. "They won't even look at it," George complained after one meeting. "They stop listening as soon as they hear our names." The prejudice ran deeper than job titles. Hedy was a woman in an era when women weren't supposed to understand advanced engineering. Her intelligence didn't fit their categories, which meant it made them uncomfortable. There was also suspicion, because wartime paranoia poisons even good judgment. She had once been married to a man with Nazi connections. Even though she had fled, even though she hated the regime that had devoured Europe, the shadow of her past made some officials glance at her invention like it might be a trap. Hedy, furious and trapped, did what they asked because she could not force them to do what she wanted. She sold war bonds. She used her fame as a weapon of morale. She raised staggering sums, dazzling crowds, turning patriotism into dollars with the power of a single appearance. People cheered, cameras flashed, men lined up to buy a piece of victory. And still, ships sank. The rejection hollowed her out in a way acting never did. She could entertain millions, but entertainment didn't stop torpedoes. The worst part was knowing she had not been proven wrong. No one had disproven her. They had simply refused to try. The patent sat, unused, while the Battle of the Atlantic reached its most punishing stretch. U-boats sank ships faster than the Allies could replace them. Sailors died in darkness. Engineers struggled against jamming, chasing solutions that broke in the ocean's hands. The answer sat in a file, labeled with a number, gathering dust because the people who owned the power to act could not imagine genius in the body of a movie star. Years passed. The war ended. The crisis that had inspired her invention faded into history's larger horrors and victories. Hedy continued acting, moving through marriages and headlines, always famous for the wrong thing. George moved on too, and time slipped away from both of them like the tide. What neither of them saw was that the world was quietly catching up. In the post-war years, technology changed. Electronics grew smaller, transistors emerged, making miniaturization practical in a way it hadn't been during the early 1940s. Cold War pressures revived old nightmares: secure communication, jamming, submarines, signal control. Engineers began exploring spread-spectrum ideas because the military needed signals that could survive interference and attack. Somewhere inside those efforts, the concept Hedy and George had patented reappeared not as a Hollywood curiosity, but as a serious solution. The idea did not need piano rolls anymore. The mechanism could be replaced with modern electronics. The core principle remained. A signal that hopped frequencies in synchronized patterns was a signal that refused to be pinned down. By the early 1960s, American forces deployed frequency-hopping style systems in critical moments. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the world balanced on the edge of nuclear catastrophe, secure, jam-resistant communication mattered more than ever, and systems based on the logic Hedy had sketched decades earlier performed with the calm efficiency of something that had always been inevitable. But no one called it the Lamarr Antheil system, not publicly, not in official papers that reached her. The work existed inside military secrecy, and even within those circles, many developers didn't know the origin story. They believed they were inventing. The invention, in a cruel way, had become anonymous. George Antheil died before he could see the world bend toward their idea. Hedy, unaware that her old torpedo thing had finally found its moment, assumed the patent had died in the same cabinet it had been born in. It wasn't until the 1990s that the past began to rise, pushed upward by historians and technologists who went looking for origins. Spread-spectrum communication had become essential. Wireless devices multiplied. The modern world started to hum with invisible connections. And people began asking, where did this begin? That question led to a patent filed long ago by a movie star and a composer. When recognition finally arrived, it came almost like an apology delivered too late. In 1997, Hedy Lamarr received a major award honoring her contribution to technology. She was elderly, living quietly, far from the bright cruelty of Hollywood. When someone explained why she was being honored, she reportedly reacted with confusion that felt heartbreakingly human. "That old torpedo thing," she said, as if speaking about a forgotten object in a drawer. "I thought everyone had forgotten." They told her they hadn't. They told her her idea had become a foundation, that the principle she described, frequency hopping, spread spectrum, synchronized patterns, lived inside the wireless systems of the modern age. Think about what that means. A concept drawn in a Hollywood mansion to defeat U-boat jamming had traveled forward through decades until it touched billions of people. Not as a legend, but as infrastructure. Not as a myth, but as math. Traditional radio is simple. You transmit on one frequency, and the receiver listens on that same frequency. It works beautifully until someone decides to ruin it. To jam it, you don't need to crack secrets, you just need to shout on the same channel. Hedy's insight rewired that vulnerability. Don't stay still. Move, jump, hop. Spread the signal across many frequencies so that interference becomes a guessing game the enemy cannot win unless they know the pattern. In her mind, the pattern was a piano roll. In the future, it became code. The point was never the paper. The point was synchronization, two ends of a link changing together, sharing a secret rhythm so tight that an outsider hears only chaos. This same logic helps wireless devices coexist. In a crowded place full of signals, phones, laptops, headphones, how do they avoid drowning each other out? They share space by spreading, hopping, coordinating, adapting. Bluetooth explicitly hops. Satellite systems spread signals so wide that receivers can pull meaning out of what looks like noise. Cellular networks use advanced spread spectrum-derived approaches to allow immense numbers of connections to exist at the same time. The tragedy is that Hedy did not profit from this. Her patent expired long before the wireless boom. She made money as an actress, yes, because the world was comfortable paying for her face. But the invention that became part of modern communication did not make her wealthy. Recognition came as a medal, not a fortune, a plaque, not royalties. And beneath that lies a bitter truth. Society often rewards the surface while ignoring the substance until it is too late. Hedy Lamarr died in 2000, a name still more famous to many for old films than for the invisible architecture of communication that followed her idea. Yet her legacy remains, floating through the air every time a device connects without wires. The signal you can't see, the link you take for granted, carries an echo of a woman who refused to accept that physics had already decided the outcome of the war at sea. Her story is not just about technology, it's about how brilliance is filtered by bias. The Navy's rejection wasn't only about weight and mechanisms, it was about credentials. It was about who was allowed to be intelligent. It was about a world so certain of its categories that it could stare directly at an answer and still not recognize it. If you want the final twist, the part that makes the whole story sting, here it is. Hedy's invention didn't fail. Time simply delayed it. The war moved too fast for the institutions that could have adopted it. The electronics of that era weren't quite ready to implement it cleanly. The culture of that era wasn't ready to believe it could come from her. So the idea waited, silent, in a file, until history grew into it. And that is why her story still matters now. Because somewhere, right now, while the world scrolls and streams and forgets, someone is solving a problem nobody else can solve. Someone unexpected, someone dismissed, someone whose credentials don't match society's idea of genius. And the next invention that changes everything might already exist, ignored, laughed at, pushed aside because people are still making the same mistake, judging the messenger instead of reading the message. Hedy Lamarr deserves to be remembered not as a beautiful woman who happened to be smart, but as a brilliant inventor who happened to be famous. She looked at a deadly problem and refused to accept the standard answer. She took knowledge, gathered in captivity, and turned it into resistance. She built a future while everyone else watched her past on a screen. The connection you're using right now, the invisible certainty that information can jump through air and reach you, carries the shape of her idea. She wanted to stop signals from being silenced. She wanted to keep control in the hands of those fighting for survival. She wanted to make sure the enemy couldn't simply scream louder and win. They told her to smile and sell bonds. Instead, she gave the world a way to communicate through noise. And the most haunting part is this: for decades, it worked without her knowing it ever did.